the reshuffle, the EFF and Ramaphosa's 2019 game plan. It has become obvious as 2018 has worn on that the political question of the year is around the political power and position of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Last week he made a small reshuffle to his cabinet, or more accurately, to the cabinet left to him by former President Jacob Zuma. At the same time, questions are being raised about why he himself has appeared to remain silent in the face of the attacks from the EFF against the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. And that in turn perhaps has even the potential to raise speculation about the current relationship between the ANC and the EFF, and the future of that relationship, considering there is an election that could be a very close run in some places. All of this takes us back to the original question: what does the current situation tell us about the power of Ramaphosa? For many, the headline to Ramaphosa's reshuffle was not about who was moved and removed, but about who was allowed to remain. It was about Gordhan Lumini, who retained her position as Minister for Women in the presidency. This is despite the Constitutional Court's findings around her misconduct in relation to the social grants payment crisis. For some, this decision to keep her in the cabinet suggests that Ramaphosa is weak, that he cannot take on the Zuma faction. For others, it was a sign that he himself lacks the ability or the will to act. However, a closer examination may reveal other aspects. If examined only through the prism of the ANC's internal politics, the only politically weighted move was shifting Namvila Mokonjane from communications to environmental affairs, and the appointment of Stella Ndabeni Abrahams to the newly reintegrated Ministry of Communications, Telecommunications and Postal Services. Mokonjane was behind Zuma at Nasrec, and campaigned aggressively for Gordhan Lumini Zuma. She was also in charge of a portfolio that includes the SAB. While it may be difficult to pinpoint one single reason for Ramaphosa's decision to move her, it is obvious that the SAB is a difficult body to govern at the moment. The board and its top executives say the accounts show it needs to shed a large number of jobs, a move which is vigorously opposed by unions and SAB employees. This process is likely to be difficult and intensely political. For the board to be successful in this, the full support of the minister will be crucial. It may also be possible that the looming elections provide a deadline. Surely the board, the minister and Ramaphosa, and perhaps most voters, would want to avoid any industrial action at the SABC during the election campaign period. Which means speed is of the essence for those who wish to push this process through. This may suggest that Ndabeni Abrahams is more trusted in this process than Mokonjane. But the retention of Lumini may also be revealing in its own way. First, as the annual campaign of 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children gets underway, Lumini will be forced into the public domain. And this will open her up to questions around the social grant payment system. She has consistently, and at every possible turn, refused to answer questions about it. Which means that this year the focus may turn out to be on her. With the effect that she is weakened further, which makes Ramaphosa's life easier when the time comes to act. In fact, she got off to a spectacular start by reportedly banning Inca from the women's activism event held to kickstart the 16 Days campaign on Sunday. Second, it is clearly still the case that Ramaphosa is not going to provide his internal opponents with any excuse to accuse him of purging those aligned with Zuma. This is in line with the strategy that he has followed for much of the year. However, it is also possible that this is a time-limited strategy. The longer it continues, the easier it will be for opposition parties to accuse the ANC of not having changed at all during the election campaign. And considering how close the elections could be in places like Gordhan, you may find that the space to continue focusing only on ANC internal politics becomes limited. This then leads to another question, around Pravin Gordhan. Gordhan last week came under the strongest possible fire from EFF leader Julius Malema. While the ANC has finally spoken on the issue, and defended Gordhan, Ramaphosa himself has appeared to remain silent. There has been no public condemnation of this attack in his own voice, and no public gesture of support for Gordhan either. This is puzzling, considering that Gordhan was so important to the campaign to remove Zuma. It is true that in many political situations, those who come to power may resent having to rely on certain people who helped them get there. They may always feel slightly vulnerable to those people. But it is also true that Ramaphosa, in the most public way, gave his political and personal support to Gordhan when he was facing a charge of fraud in 2016. It could be that Ramaphosa is trying to avoid dancing to the EFF's tune. The more he speaks, the longer this goes on, may be the thought. It could also be that Ramaphosa is concerned that if he speaks in favor of one of his serving cabinet ministers for what they say at his Ondo Commission, there will be an expectation that he has to do that for all of his ministers who testify, and some of them may not be people he wants to support. For those who are perhaps more conspiratorial in nature, and take a longer-term view, the answer may lie in the elections themselves. It is possible that the ANC finds itself needing coalition partners, not in national government, but perhaps in God. It is also surely true that it desperately wants to regain control of Joburg and Tshwane. To do that, somehow, before the elections, would be seen as a massive victory. While the interests of its members are surely closer to the interests of the members of the DA, it is also probably more likely that they would prefer a deal with the EFF. This is because of their shared history, and because it is always easier to deal with a smaller party than a bigger one in a coalition scenario. This means that Ramaphosa may feel he has to be fairly careful about publicly condemning the actions of the EFF, at least for the moment. While that may seem like ruthless realpolitik, it is also true that Ramaphosa has shown himself able to forge political coalitions with people with very different interests to himself, as a brief history of those who have recently traveled to Russia for medical treatment would demonstrate. In the meantime, the complete lack of opposition to Ramaphosa's reshuffle within the ANC, for the moment at least, suggests that he is on the right track, as slow, painful and difficult as that may be. But, with the elections looming, more drama can be expected. And it is still possible for him to be overtaken by events.